We are here, and you are here, and I just want to thank you and bless you for canceling a day of appointment in order to refill your own heart today. Something I mentioned last year is that the purpose of ReCourage is that there are a ton of phenomenal conferences on leadership. They talk about strategy and leadership, how to form a great team, how to cast vision for the future, how to meet goals, set reasonable goals and meet those goals. And there are other conferences that do a phenomenal job with that. And what we wanted to do was something different. We wanted to have a heart conference because, as I said last year, I have a strong teaching gift, but the greatest gift I bring to the family of Ada Bible Church isn't my teaching gift. And I've got a decent leadership gift, and the greatest gift I bring to the family of Ada Bible Church isn't my leadership gift. The biggest gift I bring to my church is a walk with Jesus worth having. The biggest gift I can bring to my church is a faith worth having and a walk with Christ worth having, and to serve out of a healthy heart. And so whenever we open the doors and invite people in, whether you serve in a nonprofit, whether you serve in church ministry, whether you serve in business leadership, and you try to bring Christian values into your company, it's possible to serve out of a tired heart, out of a discouraged heart, out of a numb heart, and even out of a dead heart. And so our hope today is that your heart will be much fuller after our conversations today. And genuinely, just huge thanks for making today's conversations at ReCourage a priority. And so I want to begin by talking about famous trios of the Bible. In the Old Testament, the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then you have in the ministry of Jesus' inner core of disciples, Peter, James, and John. Yeah, some of you might even think of the three wise men that bring gifts to Jesus. But my absolute favorite trio in the Bible happens to be these guys right here, Shobi, Maker, and Barzillai. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, Jeff, I'm familiar with them, but refresh my memory. Shobi, Maker, and Barzillai occur in one of the darkest stories in our Bible. And this story with these three guys moves me as much as almost any other story in the scriptures. It is the darkest day in King David's life. And this was a dude with a lot of dark days. There is an enemy that wants to end his reign and end his life. The enemy is young. The enemy was good looking and articulate. The enemy was disciplined, hyper disciplined and calculating. And the enemy was his son by the name of Absalom. And Absalom would stand outside the gates of Jerusalem day after day. The scripture says he would get up early, be there at the gate. Here's the prince standing at the gate. When people came in, out-of-towners, he would say, hey, where are you from? And the person would bow to the prince. He'd say, oh, no, stand. I'm just another man like you. Where are you from? What have you come to Jerusalem for? Have you come here to have a dispute settled? Man, I'm just so sorry. I'm afraid that you're probably not going to be taken care of in the capital, Jerusalem. I don't know, someday if I were king, day after day after day after day, and the Bible tells us that he stole the hearts of the people. And there's a day where King David is notified. Absalom has crowned himself king. He is marching on Jerusalem. And the hearts of the people are really with Absalom, your son, and no longer with you. And David has to flee the city. Absalom will march on the city of Jerusalem. He will occupy the palace. He will kill his dad, and he will kill anyone that pledges allegiance to his dad. And David flees, and there isn't time to pack. He leaves the city of Jerusalem and descends down to the Jordan River Valley and then crosses the Jordan River and a bit up north and then to the river Jabbok. And when he gets there, he's exhausted. And I can't imagine the sad, exhausted train of people that are with him, family members, loyal supporters, faithful warriors who had been with him for decades. And David ends up on the river, and they are just absolutely exhausted, and they're hungry, and they're thirsty. And that is when these three guys show up, Shobi, Maker, and Barzillai. We read these words in 2 Samuel. These three guys, they brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery. Did I mention there was no time to pack? They bring sleeping bags, bedding, bowls. You say, well, great, but I wish they had brought some food. Oh, they did. They brought cheese and honey. Let this sink in. I mean, it's always nice for someone to drop off groceries, but in this moment when you are absolutely demoralized and your spirit is crushed and you're on the run, and you don't know what's going to happen, they show up with cheese and they show up with honey. More than that, they also brought wheat and barley, flour and toasted grain, beans and lentils, honey and curds. There's the cheese and honey right there. Sheep and cheese from cow's milk. For they said, the people have become exhausted and hungry and thirsty in the wilderness. There's something about this scene where these three guys show up and unload blankets and food and pottery. Because you just go, man, you guys just be absolutely exhausted out here in the wilderness. There is something about that story that just kind of touches me and moves me at a deep, deep level. And I'm not sure I know all the reasons why. Maybe it's because as a leader, there have been times where I was discouraged and tired. Never to the extent that David was. But maybe we just all know this feeling of being worn out and demoralized, and we can identify with David. Maybe it's the fact that these friends show up and bring him food, and we can reflect back on how in some seasons where we felt alone and discouraged, the Lord placed people in our lives to bring encouragement. And maybe we identify with that moment of God's provision, how God cares for his worn out, exhausted, toasted servants in this way. I think there's another reason why this moves me. I want to be like that. I want to be like them. I want to be the guy that shows up with cheese and honey in other people's lives. I want to be like Barzillai and Shobi and Maker, who entered other people's lives. There's something about this story and seeing what they did that causes me to go, I want to be a better man. I want to be there for others. It is our hope that in some way, the ReCourage conference today for you will be cheese and honey. Refreshment at a rest stop for you. But the problem with something like ReCourage is that you will leave. And whatever encouragement you receive, I just want to suggest that it's probably not adequate to carry you for the next year till the next ReCourage conference. I would like to suggest that it is important for you to have 2 or 3 people in your life that know your soul, that know your struggle, that know your hopes, your dreams, can enter into your joys without envy, can enter into your darkness, and who know your temptation. May our gracious God bless you with 2 or 3 people in your life, and may you cultivate those friendships. You see, because you get the, like dozens and dozens and dozens of acquaintances, right? And then when you say, okay, friends, maybe you narrow it to 10 or 12, but then those who know your soul, I think you're blessed to have 2 or 3 who know your soul. So I'm reminded of this guy here. Some of you will recognize the name Aaron Ralston. Aaron Ralston, you can see the prosthetic arm there. 2010, 13 years ago, there was that movie, 127 Hours. Any of you remember that movie, 127 Hours? Aaron Ralston was hiking in Canyonlands National Park, I believe in Utah, and while he was hiking through a canyon similar to this, an 800-pound boulder got dislodged and trapped his arm against the canyon wall, where he was trapped for 5 days, dying slowly of dehydration, until finally, in desperation, he took his multi-tool, the dull knife of his multi-tool, and amputated his own arm in order to save his life, and then hiked out, which, just saying, is one of the more macho stories we will ever encounter in our lives. However, when I was reading an article on him in National Geographic Adventurer, the author of the article said the reason he ended up in this situation is that nobody knew where he was hiking, therefore nobody knew where to look for him. And while it's a wonderful, awesome, macho story, the reason he ended up with his arm pinned to a wall for 5 days and almost cost him his life is this: he was hiking alone and nobody knew where he was. He was hiking alone, and nobody knew where he was. What I'm trying to communicate is ministry can be lonely, but we make it lonelier than it needs to be. I plead with you, just don't hike alone. And somebody needs to know where you are. Somebody in your world needs to know of your deepest joy and your deepest pain. Somebody in your world needs to know what is exciting you and what you are hopeful about. And somebody in your world needs to know that you're exhausted and tempted. Somebody in your world. Don't hike alone, and somebody needs to know where you are. You need to know something. I don't hike alone. And somebody knows where I am. And part of the crew that I happen to have in my life, I didn't know it was going to happen when it happened, because it started, yes, you know how old this picture is? This picture is so old, we used an actual camera for the picture. I was 30 years old, 30 years ago. And someone said, hey, would you like to come and meet with a group of pastors in Lansing, because we're going to talk about what it would be like to go away and study a passage of the scripture together, like for 3 days. And that first time we studied Colossians, like for 3 days. I think I am probably 35 in that picture. This was 5 years in, because we started doing it twice a year. And then they did it the next year, and then did it the next year, and then did it the next year. That group stayed together? No. Guys moved away, guys stepped out of their preaching roles, but there is a group of us that have met for 30 stinking years together. And it's become a brotherhood. And so it's my joy to ask Carlton to come on up. When I say that Carlton is one of my longest, long-term friends, it's like we go back. We go back 30 years. Both of us were part of that first group, and so who better today to talk about the life-giving power of friendship than a buddy who has offered me the life-giving power of friendship, like for the last 30 years. So quick, by way of introduction, where do you live right now?
Eden Prairie, Minnesota, in the Twin Cities.
All right. How long you lived there with your bride?
18 months next week.
Okay. What do you do there?
Executive Vice President of National Ministries for the Evangelical Free Church of America.
All right. And before this recent stint in Minneapolis, where did you live?
You don't want to know.
I know. They don't want to know.
San Diego.
Okay. For how long?
Almost 16 years.
Okay. Now, we're not judging you.
No. People always ask, like,
but
what?
Some
what?
people move from Minnesota to San Diego,
Correct.
not from San Diego to Minnesota. So you pastored in San Diego for 16 years, and before that, where were you?
Cleveland, Ohio area.
Okay.
14 winters.
14 winters in Cleveland. All right. When I say that we've hung out for 30 years, it's twice a year, we calculated, because we had to cancel sometimes, there was this little thing called COVID that happened for a while that shut down some flights and whatnot. But we calculated that we have met for 55 3 to 4 day retreats over the last 30 years, which means if you map that out, we have spent half a year of our lives at a cottage with each other. And so I'm not hiking alone and somebody knows where I am. I don't know if you remember this conversation, but I remember this conversation. It was about a dozen years ago. I had an adult child who had moved back into my house. And it was one of those problematic relationships where you want to ask them to step up and you don't want to alienate them, and you're trying to figure out how to parent a young adult child that is in the process of adulting. And so this particular son had moved out, and then he moved back. He had just a few credits left on his degree and did not seem interested in having any plan to get that taken care of, which troubled me more than it troubled him.
I remember.
And it troubled me that it troubled me more than it troubled him.
I remember that too.
And his work was kind of sketchy, and so I was meeting him downtown. It was on Ionia Street, not far from the arena, and I pulled into a parking place, and we're going to go in, and he and I are going to have the conversation. And I called you, and I'm sitting there on Ionia Street as my son pulled in front of me, and I said, okay, here he is. I've got to go. You prayed for me. And anyway, it was just one of those moments where I felt absolutely lost as a dad in trying to figure out the right thing to say that would motivate and not to push out. And that was one of those moments where I wasn't hiking alone and somebody knew where I was, and that somebody was Carlton Harris.